Episode number 74, Faith in a Fresh Vibe podcast, recording on Treaty 7 territory. Season 10. Picking up the pieces from the bonus episodes during the Advent season. What's up, y'all? My name is Rohadi. Very happy that you could join us. Please rate this show, share it far and wide, get the word out. For all the guests that we have, you hear my voice on these episodes, but I usually, almost always, bring guests on. This show will feature author Tasha Jun. Her book, Tell Me the Dream Again, Reflections on Family, Ethnicity, and the Sacred Work of Belonging. A beautiful narrative that we chart through this episode. So sit back, open your ear holes, and let's get started. Tasha, welcome to the Faith in a Fresh Vibe podcast. I am particularly excited about this conversation because I feel our books are kindred spirits. Can books be kindred spirits?
Siblings, kindred spirits.
Siblings, yeah, totally. They're siblings. They're cousins.
There you go.
They would hang out at the same, family reunion and bring all of their own book foods and would have a great time. Jeez, that actually sounds incredible. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. I love that picture of a book family gathering. I'm really thinking about that now.
That's dang, if it wasn't still pandemic times, something like that could happen.
Yeah. Future.
That's exciting. That's so exciting. I'm going to hang on to that. You're right. One of the first questions that I ask all guests as they crisscross through the show is to name the lands, the traditional lands in which you're situated, but also to help situate, what city, town you are in for listeners. So where are your feet touching right now?
So I am in the greater Indianapolis area and on the traditional lands of the Miami and Kickapoo.
I want to jump right into your book. I valued the storytelling that went into it. I could feel almost the connections as you were redeveloping them or finding them anew. Tell Me the Dream Again, Reflections on Family, Ethnicity, and the Sacred Work of Belonging. We're going to talk a ton about belonging, but first off, what a beautiful book. Like from art on the outside to the stories on the inside. I'm going to ask a trite question. It's not a what compelled you to write this, but were there moments leading up to this book idea where you felt, I just have to explore this, or I just have to unpack this because something inside of me is ready to burst out?
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know if that's true for every writer and every story. But, this one, and I've shared this before, this is one that I started actually, decades ago in a college. I'm very old, but decades ago in a college class. It was a memoir class. When memoir wasn't even really considered a genre at the time. It was kind of a newer literary, genre. Not that there hadn't been any, but there was an argument about considering it as such, And so I took this class and was really moved by it. And one of the assignments was to write or try our hand at memoir. Of course, not a whole book, but just, a small project. And so when I sat down to write in that class, all that would come out were these stories, that my mom had told me. It's like they were already bubbling up under the surface, and creatively, I couldn't go in any other direction. And obviously it's also nonfiction, but we were kind of working creatively within our, writing. And so really, I always say this is when that book started. I couldn't finish it, for it's been over 20, how many years it's been, a long time since then. And so when I sat down thinking that I had a book idea, and it was more a general book about belonging at the time, I kind of just, this book came back and it was like, now it's time to finish. And so I really couldn't get away from it. So I don't know if I'll write again. I mean, I'll always be writing, but as far as books,
course,
I don't know. I don't know what that will be like, because this one felt very much like it wants to get out, and now is the time.
Yeah.
And so yes, as cliche as that may sound, but
it's not cliche. That's very I'm going to name drop the second Korean author I know of. I just finished Pachinko.
Oh, yes.
And that was a 20-year work, I think 20 plus years.
Yeah.
To put that together.
Incredible work.
Yeah, it took me so long to read that. But when I think of your story and the first ideas were teased out 20 years ago, like that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. And you couldn't finish it because it wasn't time, because you weren't there.
Yeah. I hadn't lived a lot of the stories that were going to be added to it, they hadn't happened yet. So, and I was not there, just in any capacity to finish it, emotionally, spiritually, none of that.
Yeah. What incredible timing. Hey.
Yeah.
It's funny how those things work out.
It really is. Did you feel like that with any of your books, or just, that there was something that you had to say? Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And that's why I scoff, Tasha, at the notion that this may be the only book that you put out, because there will be another, even if it's 20 more years, something that has to come out. It just has. I've been holding it, and then it comes out as a book, of course. Yeah. Even if it doesn't make sense now. Yeah. Oh, I can't wait for your next one.
Well, thank you. I'm glad that you feel like that.
I didn't realize this. It wasn't a 20-year period, but the stories are certainly ones that have taken me 20 years plus to process. But my book was a little bit, but my book was totally different. And I didn't really name it or realize it until I looked back to each one of my books has its own notepad. And this notepad had remarkable on the fringes. That's what it was called. And that was the precursor to what When We Belong wound up being.
Yeah, so, that makes a lot of sense. It's really cool.
It makes a lot of writing sense. Yeah. Oh, we're nerding out on writing now.
I love it.
I wonder if you can give us a snapshot of what it looked like. I think folks would be able to capture this. So you don't need to get into the gritty details, but what it looked like to almost, I'm sure you felt like this, dissociate from yourself in order to assimilate into dominant culture that was around you, in faith, in work, in everything, in life. Offer us the snapshot of your story of holding that tension.
Yeah, I mean, it didn't start that way. And it was more so, as we moved, as I encountered the world around me, without knowing that there was this dominant hierarchy, or this, just the ways that white supremacy flowed into everything, even in our time living overseas. As a child, I didn't have the history for that, or the understanding, or the language, but, we all feel it, whether we acknowledge it or not. And so for me, I think, and I can't remember, I mean, I have stories, but I can't remember exact pinpoints, but I remember just this kind of moving away from what felt like this safe understanding in our home of being a biracial, multicultural home. That was who we were. Could I explain it? No, but I could feel it in our home and it felt safe. But then as I moved out into the world and had a hard time describing who we were, with words, it almost felt like, there was always this opportunity, to try to explain ourselves. Like when we moved to Japan and I was asked something, I was explaining I'm an American, how that was like one of the first things I learned to say in Japanese, and getting a weird look, not realizing that, I don't look like what someone who lives here is expecting an American to look like. And then I would follow it up with, but I'm Korean, not but, I would say I am Korean. And that also receiving, almost as a further explanation. So, at a young age, it's like that question of what are you? And that
Yeah.
expectation of an explanation was already there, even overseas. I can remember feeling embarrassed, as I continued to try to explain. And so that shame starting to creep in, whether whoever I was talking to, intended for that or was kind or, about it or whatnot, just feeling that opportunity for shame to creep in and feeling like I don't want to be in this situation again. Like I don't like how this feels. But that was the extent of all I knew. I just knew I didn't like how it felt. And so to avoid anything like that, anything where someone was trying to figure out what I was, it just carries out further. And different experiences add on to it. But it was like you start to feel like you have to hide some of that. And I couldn't really hide how I looked, but I could avoid situations, and try to do whatever I could to fit in. So, and that carried on. I don't know. So, and that carried on until, for a very long time, as you read. And I think for a long time, I didn't realize that I was kind of separating. It would only come up when I was in an instance where, either someone wanted to come to my house or someone wanted to do something that would require them to step beyond this veil of what I could keep contained. And then it was like, oh, wait, that's not going to work. What am I going to do? And then it was this awareness of, oh, I'm like living two lives or, something like that. I'm hiding. And I have to face that. So
you used a word that that's not how I would describe my own experience, because I think the season just before this one is season 9 is one on mental health and embodiment. So emotions and holding those pieces. And I don't know, I'll blame culture and patriarchy of why emotions are not my strong suit and to identify them. But you said a couple of times about how you could feel. You could feel what was there in the house, but yet could not name.
Yeah. I think as, kids, and no matter what messaging we get early on, I think that's how we experience the world is we, our senses, we feel things, we taste things, we have strong reactions to those feelings. We're very much in our bodies, without having language for it. And I think, so that's what I remember. I remember, I didn't have language for what was happening, why I was uncomfortable, or why I remember turning red, when someone was asking me, and I'm like, why am I turning red? Like, and then later learning that's feeling embarrassed and what that's associated with. But you can't really control those feelings, and so I think that's very much tied to my experience with understanding who I am, and embracing or rejecting that. And so, yeah, I wouldn't have been able to explain it then, but I did feel things and I remember feeling things. So that's very real to me, very much part of this whole journey.
Yeah.
And probably trying to hide those feelings, So, but they were there.
I appreciate you just teasing out little pieces of that, because that's certainly not something that comes out from my story prominently, but it is part of the story if you have the skill or even perception to notice them.
That makes sense.
Another layer. One of the phrases that I always hear, and especially from the writers who are around the genre that we have written on, for BIPOC writers, they are all using the phrase in lament of what are you? 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 It's like that. They are the daggers that have imprinted onto us as we have struggled to find space to belong. What was the catalyst? And there were undoubtedly many, but a moment where you could sense a shift in worldview or perceptions, or maybe the whole world turned upside down when you realized that veil had come down and you were able to give name to the pieces that were actually calling you to give up something of yourself in order to fit in.
Yeah. So yes, there were a lot. And sometimes I felt like there were a lot of experiences where there was like a little chip, kind of like chipping away
Oh,
at
yeah.
all these things that I had used to kind of hold myself together or shield myself. And I talk about being very feely, but for a long time I held so much in that I was known to always have a poker face. Like I did not cry for years. So anyway, all that to say, I feel like there was a lot of little experiences that kind of chipped away, but never a huge chunk. But there was an experience, well, kind of a bunch kind of collected together when I lived in Germany, and I worked for an evangelical ministry at that time. I met some other biracial Germans who, a varied, some were biracial Asian and German, North African German, and just a mix. And I remember feeling very drawn to them, and in our friendship sharing about what it feels like to be to not feel like you fit in anywhere and to be between worlds. And I remember this sense of like, there's more than me. And it's not just an American thing. This is like and for some reason it was so comforting to me. It was so grounding. And then I had this experience where I made this meal, and I think it kind of was an overflow of that. And so to be so far from home, at this really odd time in life, but to be connecting with these people that I never would have expected to feel so close to. So out of the overflow of that, this is more of like a celebratory thing, but I remember feeling sure, like, I want to cook this meal that my mom always made, that is like a part of our family. And just this desire to share it with not only them, but like my coworkers, my team at the time, which is so odd. Like that was not characteristic of, the years prior to that. Just really proud. And so it felt like this kind of turn. And I think it came from that community. But it also allowed me to kind of look back and see some of those years of rejection, and just how in that moment I felt so alive too. So I think even coming home to myself in a way and feeling like this feels right.
Cool.
It feels so good to share this food of my upbringing, but me really, people, because I hadn't
that's so
before
cool.
that. That was one. And then I think that was like a positive experience, even though there were some sad things attached to it. And then later as a mom in a mom's group, and I wrote about this in the book, but just having someone tell me, I don't see you as Asian, and just feeling just like, I don't want it to be like this anymore. Like, not that I control what other people say, but I don't want that to be okay. That people say that to me. So, and that was another moment, and especially like I had become a mom, and I think it felt even stronger. Like I do not, as much as I can, I want to lead my kids towards embracing their whole selves, especially their ethnic identity. So it just felt really jolting and like very urgent in that moment.
Breaking the cycles.
Yes.
There you go. Have you read a lot of Brene Brown? Have you heard of this Brene Brown before?
Yeah, I read a couple of books by her like years ago, and I haven't read, if she's had recent ones, I haven't read those. But
But I mean, like, I interrogate Brene Brown in my book because so many people, culturally at least, especially white women, love them some Brene Brown.
Yes.
And I know that her work has expanded since all the different stuff she's done, but it has still struck me as highly individualistic.
Okay.
And so the question that I asked in my book was, listen, if we're going to talk about belonging, right, is the matter of belonging really a start and end when you belong to yourself? And what I was trying to tease out was that is too individualistic. It is too narrow of a definition of belonging.
Yeah.
Too narrow, but you have to do that piece. You have to be able to belong to yourself. You have to be not merely okay, but in a space where you want to thrive cooking your own foods for your friends
Yeah.
type of belonging. But I find it incomplete because it only looks at the self and it doesn't look at the, I think, inextricable pieces, which are one of them is a belonging to my people and how
Yes.
it's connected to not only my people, as in my parents, my grandparents, but my ancestors before
Yeah.
them, my language, my food, that encompasses all those pieces. In your journey of belonging, I mean, you wove this beautiful story with the relationship with your mom. Where are the pieces where it extended beyond just you and
Yeah.
perhaps the light went on, something clicked,
Yeah.
and this expansive, this belonging became far more expansive than just you?
Yeah. I love that you are bringing that up because I feel like not many people are talking about it. But as you explain that,
Mm,
that has been my experience. It hasn't just been with me. So,
mm, mm-hmm.
yeah, that's so important. I would say, I was thinking about that whole experience with the food and feeling alive. And the funny thing is, if I had been with a group of people that rejected that, I don't
Mm,
know how I would look. I
mm,
mean, yes, I would know that I felt very alive in that moment, offering my whole self, in a way that I hadn't
mm,
before. On the other hand, it was a very positive experience.
yeah.
It was received. There were some people, like some other biracial people there that I felt safe with, but then there were a lot of others that like this was new for them. All of it. Had they, in some way rejected that, or had it been a bad experience, I wonder how I would look back on it. I mean, yes, I can't deny what was going on with just me, but it was very much tied to the community that I was in. Um,
Mm,
and that
mm,
embracing of self is very much something we experience with other people. Yeah. And so, I mean, even in that way,
mm,
it wasn't
mm-hmm.
just, me sharing a piece of my mom and me being connected to her. It was also me being connected to the people that I was feeding. It's like an extension of what she
Yeah.
did with me. Um,
Mm,
so yeah, it makes a lot of sense that you would say that. I think for me, yes, reconnecting with my mom has been, I mean, that's the whole of my book a lot,
mm,
that belonging with her. And that doesn't mean that it's always feels perfect, but the work of embracing her story alongside of mine um, has been so important. I couldn't have just accepted myself or without that.
yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
that was a lot of interaction. That was a lot of, can you try to teach me how to make kimchi again? Can you, I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah, yeah.
we go back to these things that you probably tried to show me that I rejected that I really want now. And not just want because I want to listen to you or respect you or honor you. All of that is true. But I also crave it. It's like, I need
Mm-hmm.
that and I need your input and only the way you can give. I can't just go about this by myself.
Mm,
I think too, like just connecting with others who feel this kind of diasporic. I don't even know if that's a word, but I use it like grief. Those of us that kind of have
yes.
been cut off from our
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
ancestors,
yeah. Yeah, I'm glad
you
you're bringing
know?
this up. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and just feeling again that grief and lament, but also like connecting with others and like in that community. And it's kind of affirmed, yes, we do come from somewhere. We do have, a
Yeah.
history, even if those names are unknown,
Mm,
kind of taking that where are you from and what are you and flipping it like um
mm-hmm.
in a grounding way, like we do. And so yeah, and yeah, I'm talking a lot, but yeah, I think even just connecting with other Asian American women in my community, searching for that, bringing up those questions, creating spaces for us to talk about those things, that's been integral for me in understanding myself and continuing that embrace. I could not just do it alone in my, in my writing and by myself. I don't, yeah.
Yeah, it would only take you so far and it's disjointed. I
Yes.
wonder if you could expand more on the reclamation of your people. even when you're disjointed, because I think that in your history,
Yeah.
because I think this is such a crucial space, not only for BIPOC folks, but for everyone, especially, I'm not going to say especially, for white folks too,
Yeah.
because white folks have adopted whiteness and in the process have lost their people, their
Yeah.
ethnicities, their histories, their ancestors. And it would go a long way for identity, so you could latch onto something beyond just whiteness and its privileges if you found out who your people are.
Oh, yeah.
But and here's the problem for white folks, and I also think of many of the writers, even on this podcast, who are talking about, listen, the process of reclaiming my people, my ancestors, it's not only disjointed, but it is disjointed because I do not have and cannot have connections with my people, with my grandparents, with my great grandparents or aunts and uncles, be it through adoption, be it through colonization, and all
Right.
sorts. How have you bridged the gap? And that's the operative word, the gaps,
Yeah.
when it comes to reclaiming yourself, but your people and culture.
Yeah. I think first of all, just by being honest about the fact that they're there. I think one thing I've seen and have been tempted to do myself is just this jump of, well, this is my people, so I am just everything. I don't know if that makes sense, but kind of not thinking through what gaps are there, what things do I need to grieve, and that it's okay to to
Hmm.
grieve the fact, that, when my husband and I we did one of those DNA testing things, and there was like all this information, and I had some information already from my dad's side. My dad is on his paternal, on my paternal, his paternal
Yeah.
side is Dutch, and very
Yeah.
much Dutch. And then there's a lot of British, and a lot of a mix in there, but a lot of British, Scottish mix in there. And so I knew some of it, but there was a lot of information there. I could go back really far. And then on my mom's side, there was nothing. There were like two names and,
Yeah.
no
Yeah.
connections. And I think just seeing it in
Yeah.
the little tree online, it like just like broke something in me. It was like there
Mm.
was this question of, am I actually connected? Like at all?
Yeah.
If I can
Yeah.
see nothing,
Wow.
see nothing there. And so that was almost like there was this, either I just drop it and I don't know, just don't do anything with it, or I take some time to grieve the fact that there are these details that are just gone. But also take in what is true for me. Like, how did I experience love and nurturing growing up? It was all very Korean. And so there's a connection there, but I don't have names to attach to it. I don't have faces. I don't have, all of those things. So I think acknowledging the gaps, grieving them maybe, and maybe that those come back in waves. And so we have to give space for that.
Mm.
But then on the flip side,
It's wise.
um, kind of just taking time to research things like, finding out about Korean holidays that, we didn't experience growing up, but thinking through like my ancestors probably
Hmm.
celebrated
Yeah.
this,
Yeah.
probably cooked like this. What's one thing I can do to kind of reclaim that in my family line while also acknowledging that I'm learning it? It's not something that I can just pick up off the ground. I'm like learning it, trying again. That's definitely been a big process, like grief, studying, learning, being a learner of my own ancestry, if that even makes sense. And also being okay with not knowing. And I think, there's a lot of pain in feeling like I don't really fit either side. So
Yeah.
being able to
Yeah.
even do that on the other side of things, like, yes, I identify as BIPOC. I am Korean American. I am biracial, but I do have white ancestry and I do have European ancestry. And so even like
Hmm.
thinking through, what does that mean? Like, what does that mean as
Yeah.
I hold those worlds in
Yeah.
my
Yeah. Yeah.
body?
Yeah.
And thinking through the ancestors that probably they would not have been in the same realm, or it
Yeah.
would have
Yeah.
been very destructive. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Hmm.
acknowledging that.
How to hold that tension well, because at the end of the day, that is you and you
Yeah.
are good. So how to hold the goodness of your created beauty.
Yeah. Yeah.
I appreciate you naming grief and loss and to hold space around that, and that it can come in waves,
Mm,
especially when we are disconnected from that relationship.
yeah.
So I think about my people and my ancestors and the missing relational connections, and some of them we can reclaim in terms of like relationships to land, let's say. And I
Yeah.
think of my own stories of displacement upon displacement upon displacement, you know. So there's some connections of reclaiming holidays, as you expressed. But yeah, there's a grief and a loss of, and what about the grandfather I never knew, and
Right.
the great grandfather, and what about the great grandmother that I do know, and the history that has shaped and formed me more so, and holding all that in its tensions.
Yes. Yeah.
That's a beautiful work. And it's the subtitle, but one of the themes of your storytelling is to name the work of finding belonging as sacred.
Mm,
When it comes to belonging, why is this sacred work?
mm. I mean, I think it was what we were created, to be like that, to belong. I'm like, is that the right word? We were created and we do belong. We hold it in us. And yet it is very tied to our connection to others. I think when I look back on my life, it is the thing that has driven me. It's what I've been looking for, longing for, and so many of the
Mm,
things that I've done or sought out, even in things that I wouldn't even think are connected to it. But when I look back, I'm like, we all are longing for that kind
yeah,
of going
yeah,
back to our belovedness and our belonging.
yeah.
Um,
Mm,
and I think that involves one another too, not just us and God, although there is a us and God in there.
yeah, yeah.
But yeah, so I do think it's very sacred. Um I think when we realize that we're longing for that, and that a lot of that drives a lot of us, I think it changes the way we see one another too, the way that we approach each other and see one another as other human beings, and each other's humanity, and the fact that someone else that we're talking to or that we are around is also created to belong, and does carry that within them
Mm-hmm,
as well. Um,
mm-hmm.
so I kind of think just anything that we do to move towards that reality is sacred. It's sacred work. I think seeing that way seeing that has been so freeing to me, because for a long time I believed, that ministry was certain things,
Yeah,
it did
yeah,
not involve anything that we're talking about today.
yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, it's
Hmm.
just changed a lot. Um, yeah.
I haven't used that word
Okay.
as sacred, but of course it is.
Yeah.
Perhaps I have used the word holistic
Mm,
because, like you've named, there's this component, and if you've been shaped in forms of, I'll just use my context of evangelicalism.
yeah.
Gosh, if you just belong to God or belong to God's family, and that there's your belonging.
Yeah.
And once again, that's too individualistic. It strikes me as incomplete, and it's not whole. God, the great commands are to love the Lord your God, but then it's all of a sudden love the neighbor, love the other, love yourself,
Right.
love each other in community, like all these different pieces. And I will even add, and to have a connection or belonging to land as well.
Yeah.
And if you have these pieces, as you explore that communal relationship in relationship, that makes a lot more sense. So yeah, I've called it whole, but no doubt that process and that work into all of those different intersections is deeply sacred.
Mm,
As you unlock deeper pieces of yourself, how is that not sacred?
right. Yeah.
We've broached this now, so I wonder if we can trail off
Mm,
now and speak to the aspects of faith and in what manner your faith has shaped, or rather has changed, has shifted in order to come alongside, or perhaps you alongside it, a more beautiful way of belonging.
Yeah. You mentioned, or you threw out, just kind of learning in those first 20 years of evangelicalism, kind of like, we all belong to God and you belong to God, so it's fine. Like that.
Yeah.
But I think, and I think the phrase that I heard a lot, if I ever brought anything up about ethnicity or cultural, there were times when I tried to bring that up with a woman that prayed with me all the time, who was wonderful, but I was met a lot of times with, your identity is in Christ, and that's all that matters. And so,
I just spit out my water if I was drinking water. It's we've all heard that, and it's ridiculous.
Yes. Well, and I think it was so hard, because I believed that, but it felt like, okay, that just shut me down.
Yeah, a piece of you was left behind in that process.
Yes. Yes. And so I carried that with me for a long time and had this inner wrestling of, I do believe my identity is in Christ, but what does that mean if the things that, that hurt me the most, the things that I think about the most, the things that I wrestle with the most, they all are connected to my relationship with my mom, ethnicity, my, and these aren't things I can even bring up because I just get met with this. It doesn't really matter, but you matter, contradiction. And so I carried that with me for a long time. And I think I just tried to use it to even silence my own wrestling. And again, my own longings for belonging that were not being met. But I just thought something was wrong with me. That's just kind of how you go forward.
Yeah.
And then again, just came to this point, where I kind of internally, and I wasn't necessarily sharing this externally with others, but was feeling like, okay, if this is it, this is not sustainable. If, I'm going to keep carrying around this wrestling by myself and keep thinking I'm crazy and that something's wrong with me, then I can't keep doing this, and telling God, talking to God, honestly, like there has to be something more than, this thing that I've given up my life for, and this career path that I'm on. I wouldn't have called it this calling, that I feel like I am supposed to be living out. And so it was at that point where I think things started to shift. And, in my own times of journaling, when I was really that honest with God, and just kind of pouring out how I really felt. And this kind of was around the same time that I made that meal in Germany, but just really feeling the sense of, okay, if God does love me, I need to know that, you love me, God, like down into the deepest parts of who I am. And this needs to extend further than just me taking this path, this Christian path in my life. It needs to extend to my past, needs to extend to how I understand my relationship with my mom. It needs to be all of that. All of that needs to be welcomed in this, journey. And really where I went from there was starting to kind of read scripture, starting to just have these, times of solitude where I was like, he does, like, it's not just, your identity is in Christ and none of that matters. It's the complete opposite. And so that's kind of where, my journey started shifting more just internally. A lot of times of solitude, that's where I was journaling, like just all the time. But my relationship with God became very intimate at that point. It changed, everything changed. And I think that's what I needed, to kind of like, do I really believe this? Like all these doubts, like, yes, this is what I'm looking for. And not that I just throw out everything that was prior to that, but it couldn't have sustained me in a life of faith, if it continued in that shallow way. So
shallow.
Yeah. Very surface level. So,
which is probably indicative to how many Christians are formed. I remember, ironically, a saying of my pastor as a kid that so many Christians have been a Christian, like they're a mile long, but only an inch deep.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
And, he was, I don't know, but there are a lot of folks, BIPOC folks in particular, who are hanging on to the inch deep and are at tension.
Yeah.
when in fact their liberation, freedom, and wholeness are on the other side,
Mm.
on the flip side from only holding identity in one described place.
Yeah.
It's incomplete. I really enjoyed our conversation. We're out of time, but I'll give you the last word to let folks know where they can find you, your book, and
Yeah.
any other shout out.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Such an honor to be here. And this has been one of my favorite conversations so far. So I don't know if you should say that on a podcast, but it's been really fun. Yeah, I'm on Instagram. It's Tasha Jun B. And I have a newsletter. It's Shalom Sick Notes on Substack. And yeah, and my book, I think you can find it just about anywhere that books are sold. So